Hey everybody, back here with the Ford Ranger EV battery pack project. And as you remember in the last video, I was individually charging the battery modules using a small 6-cell standalone charger and balancer. And I think I had done 3 of them the last video update. I finished the other 2 last night and early this morning. And the other 2 went about the same as the first 3. I had to charge them on nickel metal hydride setting until the batteries got to about 12 volts. The last one, I even had to bring it up a little bit above 12 volts. And then I was able to switch to the lithium setting. And it seemed to balance out the cells a little bit. But all the cells in every module were really close. They were between 1.9 and 2.1 volts. So I went ahead and put the modules back in the pack that I had taken out, and I reconnected the bus bars. I hooked back up the Orion BMS that's in the pack back to all the cells, and I reconnected the pack to the DC wiring. So I got that all squared away. After that, I went ahead and finished up the connector and wiring changes that I was wanting to do to the DC wiring to allow me to hook up the charger that's under the hood of the truck to the battery pack, whether it's mounted in the truck or sitting on the garage floor here, so that I could test things out before reinstalling. So let's go ahead and take a look at that right now. What I've done is I've added Anderson power pole connectors to the cabling that will end up inside the battery pack. So that's where this Anderson power pole junction ultimately will be. But for the time being, what I've done is I've taken it out of the pack and it's laying on the garage floor here. This is actually behind the back of the pack. And I made an extension cable with 10 gauge zip cord and 2 Anderson PowerPole SB50 connectors so that I could connect the battery pack to the charger that's still under the hood of the Ford Ranger. So that takes care of the DC wiring to connect the charger to the battery pack. Now the other thing that I had to connect was the CAN bus. So I built a fairly long CAN bus extension cable to connect the charger to the Orion BMS. And I also installed temporarily my 3-way splitter so that I could connect the CAN adapter under the hood to my laptop. And looking at the forecast and as wet as it's been, I thought it's probably not a good idea to have my laptop outside. So I made some slight changes and just temporarily added a 120 ohm termination resistor on this short jumper, moved my laptop into the garage and connected it to CAN bus port 2 on the Orion BMS. The Orion BMS has 2 CAN bus ports. So CAN 1 is connected to the LCON charger right now, and CAN 2 is connected to my laptop. So the only thing left to do after connecting the DC and the CAN bus was to power up the Orion BMS. I've been using a small Motorola 12 volt DC power supply. And then the only other connection to make was to put the Orion BMS in charge ready, enable a charge ready, so that it will tell the LCON charger over CAN bus to go ahead and start charging. So all I had to do was ground one wire for that. And I looked at the Ford Ranger EV wiring diagram, found it was on pin 60 of connector 1939, ohmed it out with power turned off to make sure that, I was counting the pins and everything right, and went ahead and grounded that pin. So with all that set up, I powered up the LCON and it went into charge mode. So for about an hour, I left it set up that way, and the pack seemed to be taking a charge. The total pack voltage increased from about 240 volts to 270 volts. But after a while, it seemed to stop charging, and there were several indications on the Orion BMS that it wasn't charging. and I really couldn't figure out why it wasn't charging. So I decided to stop and take a look at the settings in the Orion BMS, because I remembered that Lanny down in Eugene had told me some of the cell settings that I had in the Orion BMS from when I got the truck weren't right for these batteries. So I reprogrammed the Orion BMS with the values that Lanny had suggested, and I started charging again. And that clearly made a huge difference. The pack is definitely charging now. From the time I started charging with those new settings until now, and it's probably been about 2 hours, the charge current has been over 14 amps. The pack voltage has went up from 270 volts to about 325 volts. Let's take a look at the live data on the Orion BMS right now. And one of the things I want to point out here is the delta between the highest cell voltage and the lowest cell voltage. When I started this process this morning after having charged all 5 of my bad modules individually, that delta was about 0.9 volts, and it has been consistently going down. That's a good thing, because we want all these individual cells, remember there's 138 of them, to be as close as possible to each other. And what we see now is the delta between the highest and the lowest is below 0.4 volts. So this is getting really good. The other thing that we can see is one of my cells is actually high enough in voltage that the BMS is balancing that cell. So that's the one that's occasionally flashing red. It's cell 138, which is, interestingly enough, the most positive cell in the pack. And it's one of the cells that's in the module that was the worst off when I started this project. It's module number 22. I don't know if you remember from episode 7, but I said, module 22, you're out of here. Well, guess what? Now it's the cell with the highest voltage in the whole pack. Well, I guess that's good. Module 22, you stick around. So I'm going to keep the pack charging. Things are looking really good. And maybe a few more hours, I'll see some more progress. I would imagine it's going to be until later tonight before I start to see the charge current decrease and the state of charge start climbing. Hopefully we can get to 100%. And I'm going to start buttoning up some other things and get ready to stick the pack back in the truck.